Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the 18th meeting of the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee in 2022. I've received apologies from Colette Stevenson, a member who is unwell today. Agenda item 1 is a decision on taking business in private. Do the committee agree to take item 3 in private? Yes. Grateful. Item 2 is about proxy voting, which the committee will be aware we've been looking at for a long period of time. We have received correspondence now from the Parliamentary Bureau and the Scottish Parliamentary Labour Party in relation to proxy voting. What I would like to do today is really take our final discussions on where we stand on proxy voting so that hopefully in the near future we can propose a temporary scheme which we can invite the Chamber to take on for a period of time. As I said, we've received 2 letters from interested parties. One that seems very much in support of proxy voting from the Parliamentary Labour Party, and a longer letter that's come to us from the Bureau. So are there any comments before we start? My view would be just to work through the letter after the comments so that we can delve into some of the questions that we'll need to resolve about coming up with a scheme. Who would like to go first? Edward, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Convener. I looked at the letter from the Bureau and there's a suggestion in there which I find unhelpful, if I can put it that way, Rand. I think there's a suggestion that pairing may be used as an alternative to short-term proxy voting. Having been in the situation last year where I was paired for a good proportion of time, I felt my vote didn't count. And I don't think pairing is an acceptable option if the member wants to exercise their vote, because they're there to represent their constituency, and if they can't vote and they're only paired, I think it's unhelpful, which is why we came to proxy voting in the first place. So I think that suggestion from the Bureau, Convener, is unhelpful, and one I hope the committee will consider as not relevant to the proposal we're putting forward.
Thank you. Any other comments? Alexandra, if I come to you.
Thank you, Convener. I acknowledge and understand the importance of this issue because it has been raised in the past and there is no doubt that there are feelings and views across the Chamber and across the Bureau. And I think that where we are at looking at the possibility of creating a pilot is encouraging because it will give us the opportunity to then look at what the criteria would be, what the duration would be, and the flexibility and all of that into this whole process. So I am really quite glad that we've got this far, and I acknowledge that there is still some way to go to try and meet in the middle with some people's views and opinions, but as a starter for 10, I think we're going in the right direction, and it will enhance and support MSPs as we go forward. There will be, as I'm sure we'll find, there'll be different views and opinions and all of that, but I think the consensus at the end of the day will find that we do end up having a proxy voting system of some kind that will support individuals that need that, and I'm content to see that progress.
Excellent. Thank you. Bob?
I think Edward Mountain raises an interesting point, because there's also discussion around how we define illness in the first place, as well as short-term illness. I think the Bureau's got a reasonable point in relation to proxy voting not being brought in for a day here and a day there, but as a kind of planned approach to supporting members to still exercise their democratic vote using a colleague's proxy in this place. I think where there's a pre-planned or predicted absence, if it's reasonable to assume that a person may be absent, but not necessarily for, say, 4 weeks or so, it would seem perfectly reasonable for there to be a proxy put in place. The idea of months upon months, I think, is too unwieldy. Also, I think we need to think about fluctuating health conditions where someone is unlikely to be able to effectively perform all their parliamentary duties due to illness, but people have good days and bad days, Convener. So the idea of when you agree a proxy that you shouldn't be able to, from time to time, take that back to ownership of your vote when you feel you're able to. Perhaps it's a particular debate you've got a specific interest in and you want to do the best you can make every effort to be there, whether remotely or otherwise, and also cast your vote. So I think proxies have to be a two-way process where you're not just giving up your vote for a set period of time, but there's a mix in how we codify that, of course, is the challenge, convener. But
Yes.
the ability for a member who has given a proxy for a period of months to seek to, as best they can, if something particularly important to them, be able to cast their vote after a specific debate, if it's particularly important to them and they feel able to.
Yeah. I think that's very helpful, thank you. And I think if we deal probably with the pairing question first, I mean, pairings are an agreement between political parties rather than individual MSPs, and we are individual MSPs within this Parliament, and the role of a proxy is a much more personal exercise of who you trust to exercise your vote. And it's interesting that the Bureau do acknowledge the fact that a proxy voting would be far more transparent than pairing, which actually I think appears on no record anywhere, is the reality of it. So to echo, I think, what you said, Edward, about the fact that's, you know, it's all in the private behind the scenes, and actually the important element from our constituents' point of view is, has their vote represented by their MSP being cast? In proxy voting, you can see that, and it remains on the record forever. I think and Alexander, you know, I think wholeheartedly I agree with you about the support that exists across the chamber to the principle of proxy voting. But as always, it's in the detail where people chop and change and then perhaps wear different hats at different times. And coming to your point, Bob, I agree. I think one of the significant areas where there are challenges in getting universal acceptance is illness. I don't think it is for a proxy scheme to define what illness is. The people who will be asking to use the facility of a proxy are an MSP who are bound by the Code of Conduct, the responsibility they have to themselves, to their constituents and to this Parliament. And I have confidence, I have a great deal of confidence that the MSPs in this session will exercise that properly. But I think there's nothing wrong in the scheme highlighting, reminding members of the importance of voting, because of all of the actions that take place within this Parliament, casting your vote is the one that makes the difference more than other. And as to the time, I agree. I think I mean that part where it happens behind the scenes with the clerks, but the actual drafting of the scheme will no doubt be a challenge. But I think it needs to be flexible. It needs to sit within a structure of understanding so that people who wish to exercise a proxy and to approach another member to say, will you be my proxy, knows what their expectations are, but also the person who accepts the proxy vote knows what their expectations are. I know we've had a bit of a discussion from the evidence about the length of time for illnesses, and I wonder whether or not it would be easier to understand if we defined not define the level of illness that would allow someone to cast a proxy, but to phrase it in the sense where the member feels it's a serious illness and they can't cast their vote, then they should be able to exercise, with the consent of the presiding officer, the role of proxy. Do you think that would satisfy, Alexander?
I do, convener. I think that would satisfy some of the elements to ensure that we have some kind of clarity around a sort of definition. Yes. Because as we all anticipate, there will not be a large number of individuals who will fall into this category. It will be a minority of MSPs that will require to have this facility. And on a time basis, whether that's a short time or a longer time, depending on the circumstances and situation they find themselves in. So I do believe that that is important, and the presiding officer has a role to play in ensuring that is managed effectively.
Yes. Sorry, Bob, please.
Just, I mean, I'm fine with if the member feels it's a serious illness. I'm just conscious of members' rights to privacy in relation to their health, and these could be mental health issues. They could be underlying health conditions that no one else is aware about for privacy and dignity reasons. It could be life-threatening, life-shortening. I'm a little bit nervous about how we protect members from others who might think, for example, if it's a mental health condition, convener, that doesn't mean the member has to stay at home and do nothing. They're still allowed to try as best they can to get on with their life. So I think there's a challenge here with the public perception of how we support members who have serious illness to, as best they can, get on with their lives, even if it's understandable they're not going to be able to be at their work, so to speak, for a period of time.
Yes. I think that's why, I mean, I mentioned in the debate, and I know I've mentioned in the past, I think it's those events where the MSP needs to step away from being an MSP for the reasons. I don't think it's something that should, in fact, ever really be made public. I mean, it's an approach that the MSP would make to the presiding officer, who is an MSP, who was elected by us. And, you know, I, in my own mind, I feel that that sort of final decision should rest with the PO, but not as the role of a doctor, not in the role of a counsellor or anything like that, simply in the role of presiding officer, where an MSP comes to her, in this case, and explains that they would like to exercise a proxy for a reason. And, you know, MSPs in this place have very high standards they're expected to keep, and indeed I think the MSPs in this place set themselves high standards, and I don't feel there needs to be medical notes and additional doctors or something like that. I think that's treating it entirely wrong, because I think we do have a duty of care to members in here, as we have a duty of care to everyone, that extends to actually trusting what they're saying about their own health in it. Edward, do you want to?
Just going to emphasise and agree with Bob on that. I mean, I took my oath remotely because I couldn't come into the Parliament, and that was a discussion I had with the presiding officer beforehand. And the presiding officer was aware of the situation, but no one else knew of the situation. And I would say that we need to somehow get across to members that the presiding officer has a pastoral duty to the MSPs as well, and that they should have the confidence to speak to the presiding officer.
Absolutely, and maybe that indeed would form part of the scheme, as sort of the guidance, the reminders that, you know, are always helpful, of the role and responsibility. I think the other thing that has come up is in relation to sort of the other aspects. There seems to be very strong agreement that maternity and paternity periods should be covered by proxy, because you know, I think just common sense, that's where proxy voting in relation to public affairs like this sort of started. I know there's some disagreement over the period of time, but again, you know, almost following on from what Edwards has just said, I think that's a discussion between the member and the presiding officer. And I think it is wrong to set an arbitrary period that can't be extended. There's nothing wrong with guidance for the period of time, but I think we need to respect that people are individuals, and the effect of circumstances are different on different individuals. And if we can't be flexible enough to do that, then I think we're in a disappointing place. The other area that has been discussed is, and I think rightly so, where there's an adoptive situation and someone is in essence taking a new member into the family. That would be an expectation. And obviously, sadly, bereavement, I think, needs to be there, albeit that, again, a very sensitive issue that needs to have the flexibility to be dealt with by it. Are we sort of content for those areas, for the trial period at least, Bob?
I agree. Before I go on to make a point about bereavement, I'm just noting the correspondence where I've talked about the Bureau broadly agreed that mirroring statutory paternal leave arrangements would be appropriate. I think it has to go beyond that. I think statutory parental leave for fathers 2 weeks. I think I could be wrong. I think there'd be an expectation, I hope, in this place that fathers should, as much as possible, there's still a gender bias through inequality in society, but fathers as possible should be striving to be equal partners in parenting their children, and 2 weeks might just not cut it. I have to say that's another example where you might want to use your proxy sparingly, but because of family circumstances, you need to use that. Same with mums as well, of course. You're not ill, you're a new parent, and you're trying to balance everything out. So the need for that flexibility. But I think just when we put a time period on parental leave, if we're going to do that or not, certainly it shouldn't be statutory parental leave, I don't think, for fathers anyway.
I agree with you, Bob, and I'm conscious that if a male MSP wanted to take maternity leave in the way that it can be shared now, then that parental leave block of 2 weeks may cause problems, which is why I am relatively comfortable with allowing the flexibility with guidance, because I genuinely do not believe any of the MSP members in this session would in any way, shape or form try to abuse that. And I think, I think what you say, Bob, about those first 2 weeks, crucially important when a new child comes into this world, that where available, both parents play absolutely every part in making sure that's as easy as possible for each other. Yeah, please.
It's also worth noting that's a conversation MSPs will have with their parliamentary parties as well in relation to that. So there's discussion that has to take place within parliamentary groups about any agreement reached there. But proxies is something different. That's an individual arrangement from the MSP and the presiding officer. And perhaps I used the wrong expression when I spoke about parental leave, because a lot of new parents, myself included, some will want that leave to devote completely to their children. Others will want to try and just get that balance. So there'll be days where they will be able to, or will wish to, or make alternative arrangements to allow them to be involved in the life of this Parliament more actively, and sometimes that won't be possible. So it's just to echo your comments about flexibility, and every case is individual. Everyone's got their own home circumstances.
And I think, thankfully, at this stage, because of the hybrid nature of the Parliament and the remote voting, there are a number of different levels and ways in which a member can exercise their vote. I think proxy voting is talking to a very small number, as Alexander said, but actually a very important facility to have that discussion and to have the vote cast and recorded as they want. So if I go to our sort of... Sorry, is there anything else in the letters that anyone would like to raise? Sorry, Edward.
Camina, yeah. Just, I noticed in the Bureau letter, and I know this isn't going to happen, but I'm a great one for having things prepared in case it does happen, is that they talk about whether the proxy vote has been incorrectly used, and whether we ought to have some sanction in that. Now, I don't know. I personally believe that it will never happen. But if it does happen, it is a serious breach of conduct by that member. And I would just like, if possible, the clerks just to think about whether that's covered by the Code of Conduct for members. And I personally think we ought to write something in there to say a breach of the use of the proxy will make you fall foul of section whatever it is in standing orders. And I haven't looked it up, I apologise.
But, I mean, I think if the relationship between the person granting the proxy and that person who cast it was abused in that way, I certainly think looking at the Code of Conduct and responsibility not to be discourteous or disrespectful would seem, never prejudging a situation, would seem to apply fully, fairly, squarely on that. And I think that, the relationship between the two people, one who holds the proxy and one who's granted it, has to be based on one of trust. And actually, that is one of the fundamental principles of this Parliament. So would there be comeback? I imagine there would, probably in many forms. And similarly, I think, where we look at situations, both in this session and previous sessions, where votes have been the wrong way, there's always been the availability for that member to put their intent on the record through a standing order, but obviously would not change the actual count of the vote at the time because of the way, for the need for certainty.
I just think when we're doing it, we could say that the committee believes that this part of the Code of Conduct would be breached if the person knowingly
yes,
did that.
Bob,
Thanks, Convener. I think this also draws attention to the responsibility on the person casting the proxy, not just to cast it as directed, but there'll be situations where business in this place changes quite quickly and speedily as events change, and there'll be times where that relationship between the person who's asked someone else to be their proxy and the proxy puts some time constraints and burdens on them to make sure they keep that relationship going and make sure it's not out of sight, out of mind. I know about my colleague how they would have voted, so I'll cast it that way anyway. I'm just wondering whether there's the need just to, whenever we draw up guidance in relation to this or rules and regulations, we just say something about the responsibility of the person casting the proxy vote, because it could be a burden on them time-wise to make sure they check in at a time-appropriate occasion with the person they're casting the proxy for, to make sure they've gathered their views accurately for how they might wish to cast their vote. So I think I would just say that, but also about whether or not someone should hold one or more than one proxy. I think it's worth just airing a little bit as well. Whilst there's been nothing to prevent it, ideally it wouldn't happen, because we wouldn't want the perception of block voting. I don't think that would be the perception, but it's just to make sure there would be nothing to preclude one person holding more than one proxy. But I can just see how it might not be ideal, Convener.
I think it's interesting that you put those 2 points at the same time, because of the responsibility if you're holding someone's proxy. And we know stage 3 amendments, there isn't going to be time to pop out and have long, lengthy phone calls about it. So it is based on a relationship of trust. And then part of that is that, relationship in how many proxies are you holding, and are you doing the right thing by holding more? And certainly I don't think proxy voting, and we heard very, very strong evidence, is not to be used to create a block vote, which has happened in other parliaments, which I don't think we heard any evidence supporting at all. And indeed, some people who were holding those block votes were adamant that they didn't want them. So I agree with that. And I think, I know we've talked about the figure of not more than 2, because in relation to the current setup of the parties and there being no independent members here in this session, that would work for all of the parties, and certainly for the period of the trial. I think 2 seems to be a sensible number, because we don't know. It may be that someone who holds 2 proxies says it's just too hard and it should only be 1, and we can look at that at the end of the session. Alexander.
Also in the letter, Convener, the Bureau discusses the practical operations about the digital voting system. And as we know, we've had difficulties with it in the past. I think it was called robust, and that wasn't always the situation we found ourselves in. But there will possibly be the opportunity for the digital system to incorporate something in the future, and I know that's being looked at. And I think that is something to be welcomed, because that does give, once again, a little bit more trust in the system. But it plays a part in how this whole process will progress.
I think that's very helpful, because the iterative nature of change that this committee has strongly backed with regard to hybrid and the development, if the trial was in undertaking, it's something that can be looked at as matters progress, really, which is helpful. Edward, did you want to?
Yeah, just the final thing is the operation of the proxy, which I don't know if you want to head off with, Convener. I have just the mechanics of it. I'd be quite interested to know your views on it.
Yes, that's
sorry. That's
no, it's
because then I can answer my.
It's interesting. I mean, I know discussions have taken place, and certainly the discussion that the simplest procedure that I've heard is that it's done by way of during the votes, the person casts their own vote during the time, and then at the end of it, before the votes are counted, you pop up to point out to the presiding officer you hold a proxy by way of point of order, and you want to exercise it in this way. Having previously ruminated a million and one ways how this would actually work, when someone suggested that, it just seems so simple, because that's what we do now. on the off chance that any of the technology should fail during a voting period. So the Chamber are both used to it, but it also confirms on the record separately how the proxy was exercised. So I think that's, certainly for the purposes of the trial, a relatively straightforward, simple way. I don't know, comments, Edward?
On a normal decision time, that absolutely works in my mind. When you've got a complicated procedure of a stage 3 debate, where you could have amendment after amendment after amendment, I think it might be useful in those situations that members have a duty to forewarn the presiding officer or the person in the chair that they will have a proxy vote. And maybe, I don't know the solution to this, is work out a way that they don't have to pop up every 30 seconds on every vote to do the point of order, because it will take it out. I don't know, Convener, the answer, but I do think there is I think it's a matter of courtesy before each vote, whatever stage, for the member holding the proxy to remind the presiding officer that they hold the proxy for that individual.
I certainly think that's helpful, and the presiding officer will, of course, be aware, having in essence granted the proxy in the first place. I hear what you say about the stage 3, but I wonder if, given the very small numbers that we're talking about, and actually given sometimes the chaos that ensues should we have problems with the voting apps, even in the chamber, if you happen to be in one of those down spots, the number of points of order that are made even during stage 3, I'm not sure it's a massive inconvenience. But
Convener, I take your point and I accept it, and I would dispute there's ever chaos in the Parliament.
Appreciate Bob.
Maybe being slightly flippant, Convener, for what is a serious and important subject, of course, but there is some new technology been involved called pen and paper, which, heaven forfend that an MSP couldn't have relevant voting slips to pass to the presiding officer as and when, if there has to be a trail, which might, if there's 100 amendments, 100 points of order, can add quite a lot of time onto business in an afternoon. But it's not for us to decide that this morning, Convener, but sometimes old technology can work as well.
You see, that's interesting, because I have, and this is in no way disrespectful, but I have never envisaged the proxy votings just happening in the chamber. I was actually thinking, of course, in my own mind, I'm actually thinking of people who are joining at present through Blue Jeans and then doing their point of order after that. How strange that is. There we are. There's a change of experience in this place, maybe. I don't know.
Yes,
difference
absolutely.
of experience. But yes, I mean, I agree, and I think it's something that perhaps we need to look at and certainly to possibly discuss further. And yes, I mean, people talk of dread over various planning bills in the past, and indeed various traffic regulations in the past about it. Is there anything else about the letter, or can I just see if we've got a... Are we happy for the trial to be not less than 12 months, just because I think we need to have data to decide how we go forward? The eligibility for a proxy vote, we are talking about maternity, paternity, bereavement. Are we happy with the phrase serious illness? Do we just want illness?
I personally think illness is sufficient, because it puts the expectation onto the members to explain to themselves it's a serious illness, rather than them having to explain to anyone else.
Okay. Yeah.
Can you also, in terms of parental leave, should that include, sorry for prolonging the conversation, we don't know members' personal circumstances. Members could become foster carers for the first time, or adoptive parents for the first time. So would parental be a catch-all in relation to that? I'm just thinking in relation to that.
I certainly don't, Nigel, agree with you about the use of any sort of statutory definition of time to define the proxy for parental holding, and I wonder whether it actually comes to how long the proxy should exist for, rather than... So do we have an idea that we're looking at a period of time for... So once you have a proxy, all proxies are the same for a same period of time. but with flexibility that we've talked about on an individual basis, and indeed the opportunity, subject to the consent of the PO who grants the right to vote anyway within the chamber, it being extended. Would that give you more comfort than trying to define it into a statutory?
My apologies, Convener. Perhaps I didn't make my point articulately enough. It wasn't about, as when you said maternal and paternal, it was making sure that that covers all forms of family
yes,
relationships, not just the birth of a good child, but where a member in this place may become a foster parent or foster carer for the first time, or adoptive parent.
Yeah, no, my mistake, absolutely. I think it should cover that, and I also think that we should make mention that it should cover bereavement, because again, all of these things are not requirements on members to take up a proxy vote. It is an opportunity, should they wish to do that. Period of time that the proxy should last. I mean, 4 weeks, but to be extended, or do we have the flexibility that that's actually a discussion between the member and the presiding officer, which...
I think...
Edward?
Sorry, Convener. I think there's... I'd like to feel there was a relationship between each member and the presiding officer where they had the confidence to speak to the presiding officer. And by putting a 4-week period on it initially, and then for them to speak to the presiding officer again, allows the presiding officer to exercise their pastoral care of the individual. And I think that's important. I really believe that's important. And I also think it's important for the member to continue to feel engaged and wanted by the Parliament. So I'm keen on a 4-week thing, but not limited in the sense that I see maternity leave as 26 weeks and you can extend it by another 26 to 52, but only if you've been employed for a certain amount of time beforehand. I don't believe in that. I think we should trust the presiding officer and the members to behave in a way that's appropriate, and I'm sure they will.
And ensure that engagement continues on, as you say. Are we content with that then? Excellent. The verification process, or in other words, how does it happen? I think this really needs to be a discussion probably with the presiding officer's office as well, but we are content that it should be the presiding officer that grants the proxy, albeit that there will be an administrative process that sits underneath that would be dealt with. Yeah, excellent. And we are, I think, content that the person who grants the proxy should, as appropriate, be able to take back their vote for specific instances, and the scheme should be flexible to show that. The transparency, again, I'm actually content by the fact that from the purposes of the Parliament, we will be aware that a proxy vote's being cast through the scheme of actually casting it, rather than anything more public than that beforehand. Obviously, the member may choose to explain what's happening about it, but I don't think we need more than that, and I certainly don't think, other than the member and the presiding officer, anything in relation to the actual application itself. I'm content with that. And I suppose the last bit comes back to and we've discussed this, about what happens when it goes wrong. I mean, it is a very high onus to become an MSP of trust and honesty. And I'm quite taken by Edward's suggestion of something in the guidance to remind, and indeed you, Bob, as well, to remind members of the high level of expectation on them, and the fact that this is a relationship of trust that goes above and beyond the MSP, between two people, that one holds the proxy. Did you want to?
Yes, absolutely. When I made my comment, it wasn't about trust. I'm hoping that that's implied, but yes, of course, let's put something a bit more formally down there. It was more about just reminding MSPs that hold the proxy vote about their responsibilities in terms of staying in contact and having that ongoing relationship with the person whose proxy they hold. Something like Edward said about with the presiding officers, to make sure people are aware. from this place for a period of time don't feel forgotten about, and there's that ongoing support offered, and the person that holds the proxy has also got a very important role to play, I think, in relation to that.
And there may well be a role, I fear to say, for this committee, but certainly for the Parliament when and if the trial period starts, to give an opportunity for MSPs to come and ask questions about it and to investigate it, so they understand both the obligation but also sometimes the opportunity that they may feel makes some situations easier for them to deal with. Alexander.
The dialogue needs to be there, Convener. As we've already said, the trust is vitally important, but the communication is also vitally important between the member, between the proxy, between the presiding officer, to ensure that everybody is aware of what the roles and responsibilities are and that everyone is being looked after. And I think that's important as well.
Excellent, thank you. Well, oh, sorry, Bob.
I apologise.
No.
For being. I do recall during the debate we had in the Chamber, I spoke in relation to proxy voting about further consultation with members. I think for clarity that was, and I'm not sure I made it clear in the Chamber, it's further consultation following a review of how the temporary rule change has worked, rather than another period of consultation before we'd move. I think that is the situation. I just want to be clear.
Yeah, I think
my own head in relation to that. And if that is the case, my secondary comment would be that I'm just wondering if we offer MSPs the opportunity to give not quite feedback in real time on how it's going, but a year is quite a long time before we start kind of engaging with the MSP how it has or hasn't worked, or whether after a period of time we then start to do some of that consultation work, a kind of almost like an interim review. Because I'm just conscious during the debate in the Chamber, I was talking about further consultation with members, and it's making sure I'm sure members are very keen to see this happen, but just to make sure we're taking all members, or as many members with us, as clearly and openly as possible.
I think that's very helpful, Bob. I mean, the procedure would be a temporary rule change, which would sit next to a very short report from this committee to go to the Chamber to be voted on. And then the trial period would start. I'm slightly concerned that any member who wants to exercise a proxy fears that the minute they exercise it, the committee will be there watching them and asking them how it's going.
Fair point,
but
yes.
certainly I think you are right that during the period of the trial, what evidence does come out, what opinions and views members have, they would be more than welcome to share those with the committee, so that when this committee came to review it for the purposes of either continuing the temporary rule change or whatever, that can be taken into account. I think there needs to be some flexibility because we have no evidence how this works. It has never been done. And I certainly don't want to frighten any members away who may wish to exercise a proxy vote with fear of this committee hugging their shoulders to see how it goes.
Yes.
Yes,
It would be helpful as well for the first year that if the clerks could keep a record of the amount of times that proxies are used to inform decisions on how to do it.
Yes.
Because I know it's difficult to do it retrospectively. It's easy to do it at the time.
Yes, a watching brief may be sensible. There may be some enthusiasm, as I say, over the first time it happens, so we will see and await. Can I thank the committee for that? I'll now close the public part of this meeting and thank those who are watching.